All right, everyone, we are going to get started immediately. Grateful you're in for joining fellowship. But at this time, we're going to turn our attentions back to our next presentation, which is once again Barbara O'Neill. Thank you so much.
Welcome back, everyone, and we thank Chris for those amazing stories. It's always thrilling to hear of people having such dramatic lifestyle changes, and it's almost unbelievable that such simple changes can have such incredible results. And it's not until you try it that you see it for yourself. But a huge problem we're seeing today is diabetes. And I know the Australian figures. In Australia, 500 new diabetics are being diagnosed every day in Australia. Why? Because remember, Proverbs 26 verse 2 states that the curse causeless shall not come. There is a reason for that, and we see incredible turnarounds. We even see people conquer type 1 diabetes, and what are we told about type 1? We're told it's incurable, isn't that right? Excuse me. So let's have a look at diabetes. And to understand diabetes, we need to have a look inside the cell. And to know how the glucose gets inside the cell, we need to look at the pancreas. And so we're going back, and the first thing we have to look at, of course, is the pancreas that actually balances blood glucose levels in the blood, and it's the insulin that's released. You see that there are two hormones released from the pancreas for managing blood glucose, and insulin's one that we know very well. In fact, it's the insulin that unlocks the door to get the glucose into the cell. So without insulin, the glucose can't get into the cell. So when blood sugar levels go high, if they go very high, then it means high release of insulin, because insulin's role is to get the blood sugar levels down. But if the blood glucose levels are really high and there's high release of insulin, sometimes the blood sugar level can go too low. And so now the other hormone that the pancreas releases is glucagon. And glucagon is the hormone that's released when blood glucose levels are low, so it gets the blood sugar level up again. I don't have diabetes. My pancreas works very well. And so right now, these hormones are just, it's almost as if after breakfast this morning, the pancreas said, a little bit of insulin, please. And it really didn't, I'm sure it didn't go too low, because that breakfast this morning wouldn't have caused a massive rise. But if it does go a little bit low, then the pancreas says, a little bit of glucagon there, please. And there it's just balancing very nicely. But when blood glucose levels go very high, very fast, it's not, a little bit of insulin, please. It says, quick, release the insulin. So this massive up and down is what's wearing pancreases out. That's one of the main reasons. So what causes massive highs in blood glucose levels? So now we have to look. We're going to go back and look at the food. And it surprises me how the average person is eating such a high carbohydrate diet, because when you look at every country in the world, there's got a carbohydrate. So all through Asia, you've got your rice. And then if you go to the United Kingdom, well, the potatoes are very popular up there. And then if you go to maybe the Mediterranean, we're looking at the pastas and the pizzas. So every country, part of their traditional diet had a carbohydrate, but it's almost like today we've put them all together. So a high carbohydrate diet, yes, would be cereal. And we know that's popular because there's a whole aisle devoted to it. Bread is a very popular carbohydrate, but also pizza has become a popular one, but I didn't even know what pizza was when I was a child. Pasta. I didn't even know what pasta was when I was a child. I'm a fifth-generation Australian Scottish descent, so our food was sausages or chops, mashed potato, frozen peas or beans every night of the week, except for Sunday. Then Mum would cook a roast lamb. And I thought every person in the whole wide world ate that, because all my neighbours and all my relatives ate that, but it's a big difference today. But also rice. I didn't even know what rice was as a child. But something I did know what was, which was cookies, cakes, pizzas. No, we've done pizza. All your cakes, etc. So I'll just say cakes, etc., because you could just about fill the board with this one. So that's croissants, muffins, pretzels. There's a big one there. Potatoes, we certainly knew what potatoes was. So as a child, the main carbohydrate that we had was potatoes, and the only time we really ate bread was sandwiches for lunch, and we'd have cereal for breakfast. But last and certainly least in nutritive value is the pure crystallized acid that's extracted from the sugarcane plant. So you see, what I'm saying here is that people seem to have gone to a huge carbohydrate diet, and it's having disastrous results. I don't think anyone chose to eat that way. It's just there. It's just easy. And we're such a fast society today. And because of the technology in homes, which is television, computers, iPads, phones, a lot of people aren't getting to bed early. A lot of people are going to bed late because they're caught up with all of their devices. So they get up late, and then it's just rush, rush. What's the quickest breakfast? Cereal, pour it into a bowl, milk goes on, it goes like wet tissue paper down the hatch in 5 minutes, out the door. And then mid-morning, hunger, because it doesn't take you very far. And as you'll find out tonight when we go on our journey through our gut, there are 3 things that keep the food in the stomach longer: fibre, protein and fat. And this, especially when it's refined, it's almost totally deficient in fibre, protein and fat. And so it's going through to, and then got to have more, got to have more. So that's why I think this diet has basically developed like that. It's just quick, it's just there, it's just fast. I raised my children up on a mountaintop in a rainforest. This was not fast food. Down on the farm, this is the slow food. It takes a while to make cereal, it takes a while to make bread, it takes a while to cook rice, it takes a while to cook potatoes, and of course refined sugar, it's an impossibility if you're making it yourself. What's the fast food down on the farm? Apples, bananas, fruits, vegetables. Because 2020, when we were locked down, I became the gardener. And my grandchildren would come and join me in the garden. You know what they used to do? They used to pull a carrot out, knock most of the dirt off and eat it. Dirt and all. And as you'll find out tonight, not a problem, because it goes in one ear and out the other, because our gastrointestinal tract basically is a hollow tube. So let's have a look at the effect of this high carbohydrate diet. All of these foods break down in the gastrointestinal tract to a singular structure called glucose. And glucose, now it's out of the gut and into the blood, it goes straight to the project manager, which is the liver, and the liver determines where it goes. But as it's in the blood, it needs help to get into the cell. So what's happening is the brain's constantly assessing the glucose levels in the blood. So high glucose, as I mentioned previously, releases high insulin. And so insulin is the key that unlocks the door to get it into the cell. As we looked at in our last lecture, it goes through a 20-step pathway, which delivers 2 units of energy, eventually gets to the 8-step pathway. That 8-step pathway gives 36 units of energy. And we also looked at how that happens because of oxygen. But only so much glucose can be sent through the energy cycles. And on a high carbohydrate diet, we've still got a lot left over. And so now it gets stored. It's quite a fascinating process. These little molecules of glucose get stored. And they're already in the muscle cell, just waiting to be used. And their name is glycogen. Glycogen is a name given to quick-release glucose stores. And that's why you don't need to eat before you exercise, because you've already got a store in there. It's already in your muscle cell. So when you start moving that body, it's vital, this is early morning, it's vital that you be hydrated. You need water to be able to release them. So you wake up in the morning, have your water, go for your exercise. As you start moving the body, it needs fuel, so it plucks the glycogen, feeds it through the pathway, plucks the glycogen, feeds it through the pathway. It's an amazing process. Now, only so much glycogen can be stored in the muscle. And it's like in a prison when it's in the muscle, it can only be used by the muscle. But the good news is the liver, and we'll be looking in detail at the liver tomorrow. Here's the liver. The liver also can store glycogen, but this glycogen, it can go all over the body. It can be used anywhere in the body. That's the good news. But the glycogen in the muscle can only be stored by the muscle. But on a high carbohydrate diet, we've still got glucose left over. Only so much glycogen can be stored, so now the excess is stored as fat. And on this high carbohydrate diet, always with an excess of fat, what's happening to Americans and Australians today? They're getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So this is the third place that this excess glucose is stored, is as fat. I've just given you the basic science there, and you can see by what I've just shown you that fat doesn't make you fat. What makes you fat? It's this excess of glucose which is created by this high carbohydrate diet. So we've got two main problems that this has caused, two main problems, and one is excess weight, but the other is wearing out of the pancreas. You see, let's go back to this high glucose dumped into the blood, and the insulin is released in response, and it comes to the cell, and there's just so much coming that the cell develops insulin resistance. It's almost as if the cell says, I'm sick of the sight of you, and it resists it. So what happens now is the glucose can't get out of the blood and into the cell. And the brain notices that the glucose levels are still high. So it says to the pancreas, more insulin, more insulin. But it's not that we need more insulin, it's that the cells developed insulin resistance. And it's got to do something with that excess glucose, so it spills out into the urine. Diabetes mellitus means sweet urine. And the person starts to get thirsty. Have you noticed that's one of the signs? Lots and lots of water, because they're losing so much urine because there's so much glucose in the blood. See this vicious cycle. But something else is happening in the blood, and we're going to look at this tomorrow in the heart. Here's the blood. So what's happening is you've got protein molecules floating through the blood, and when you've got this excess glucose, it starts sticking to the protein molecules. Starts sticking to it like this. And so what that's contributing to, especially as we'll look at build-ups happening on the arterial wall because of damage to the arterial wall, and plus with these little ages they're called, these little combination of protein and excess glucose molecules, What's happening in the arterial wall? Instead of a blood flow of this much, we're getting a blood flow of this much, because you've only got this small channel. That is why often with diabetes, people get peripheral neuropathy, because the blood is not getting to the extremities, because it's all getting blocked up. Also, penile dysfunction, blood supply to that private area is getting restricted. What's also happening is Alzheimer's, because blood's not getting to the brain. And remember, the life of the flesh is in the blood. The blood carries the oxygen, the blood carries the nutrients, the blood carries the water. You get limited blood to the extremities areas, you get all of these problems happening. And that's what Chris mentioned. It's not just diabetes, it's all the overflow effect. In fact, Alzheimer's has been called diabetes type 3. Have you heard that? And so, how do we turn this around? That's the million-dollar question. How do we turn this around? Before I show you how we can turn it around, there's one other aspect that it's important to look at. There's no doubt about it, there was no diabetes on the planet till sugar was refined. Hippocrates is 400 years BC. There's no mention of diabetes in his writings because sugar was not refined then. There's no doubt about it. Sugar's a big contributing factor. There's a book called Caffeine Blues by William Dufty. He's an excellent writer, so it's very easy reading. In fact, my son, when he was 15, was reading it on a bus, and the girl next door said to him, "Oh, can I have a look at your book?" He didn't get it back. It's a book you can hardly put down. It's very well written. He looks at the history of sugar, and he also shows how sugar is a huge contributing factor to diabetes. One of his chapters is called From Bottle to Needle, showing that the sugar drinks that young children are given from a young age, this high glucose. But something else has come in that has tipped the scales. And it's found in, I'll use a red, it's found in the majorities of cereals. It's found in bread. It's found in pizza. It's found in pasta. It's found in fact, we could put a lot of ticks here when you consider the croissants, the muffins, the cakes, the biscuits, the cookies, etc., etc. It's a grain, and it's wheat. Wheat? As one diabetic told me, she's told as a diabetic she's got to have whole wheat bread, whole wheat pasta, whole wheat. So what's the problem with wheat? Well, there's no problem with the wheat that God created, but in the 1950s, wheat went through intensive crossbreeding. They wanted to create a plant with a high yield of grain. When I was a little girl, wheat grew this high. If you notice how high it grows today, and it grows this high. See, it was in the 1950s, it was put through intensive crossbreeding. So why did they do that? They did that to help with the starvation crisis in Africa, in Mexico, in India. And they came up with a plant that only grows that high with a very thick stem because it has to hold sometimes up to 8 times more grain per plant. Because if it stayed this high, the stalk broke. So they had to go low and thick. 6 to 8 times more grain per plant. So in 1976, Dr. Norman Bourlat got a Nobel Prize for his hybridized wheat. You see, they rushed it through with no safety studies. Sound familiar? Rushed it through with no safety studies because they didn't think they had to do any testing on wheat. Rushed it through with no safety studies. Only now are we starting to see the problems that this hybridized wheat has caused. So by the end of the 1970s, this wheat went worldwide. By the 1990s, every cereal, bread, pizza, pasta, cake, etc., pretzels, donuts, all made out of the hybridized wheat. So what did it do? What I want to show you, and I'll look at what it did to the gluten or the protein structure in another lecture, but I want to show you what happened to the starch structure. So the starch structure that was created, notice what I said, it's not naturally in the wheat, it was created. It was just basically a side effect of the intensive crossbreeding. It created a starch structure called Amylopectin A. So let me show you what Amylopectin A, the effect that has on blood glucose levels. So that's average blood sugar level. Amylopectin A gets the blood sugar level up very high, very fast, and you've always got that corresponding dump. That's A. Let me give you something to compare it to. Amylopectin B is found in bananas and potatoes. Now, if you're familiar with the glycemic index in bananas and potatoes, what's the glycemic index? That's how quickly, or it's a reading or an index on how quickly the glucose in that food is released into the blood. Bananas and potatoes are fairly high. So the amylopectin B that are found in bananas and potatoes naturally gets it relatively high, relatively fast, relatively low. Another one to compare it to is amylopectin C. So where's amylopectin C found? It's found in beans, so chickpeas, lima beans, black-eyed peas, cannellini beans, lentils, soy. All your legumes are high in amylopectin A, and that C gives a nice steady rise, a nice steady maintenance, and a nice steady drop. What does every cell in our body desire, need? A nice, steady, consistent delivery of fuel. And the breakfast I had this morning is giving me a very nice, steady, consistent delivery of fuel. And if there are any diabetics in here, I'm sure they can testify that that breakfast this morning did not give a rush of a high, and so there's no corresponding dump. It gives a nice, steady, consistent delivery of fuel. And our brain cells, they consume 15 times the glucose of any other cell. They're allowed to. That's headquarters. And that's why the brain suffers majorly with these quick highs and the quick lows, because our brain can only hold a 2-minute supply of glucose. So once the blood sugar levels dump after a quick high, you've only got 2 minutes and the brain's not working. It's called hypoglycemia. A man said to me one day, he said, "Barbara, I just got a hypoglycemic attack on the bus." I said, "What time did you get that attack?" He said, 11 in the morning. Then he collapsed and had to get the sugar cube out of his pocket and put it in his mouth, because, that'll get him up. So I began to investigate, because I'm a private investigator. I want to know why. We should all be private investigators. I said, "What you have for breakfast?" Didn't have breakfast. "What you have for brunch?" He hesitated, which told me he didn't really want to tell me. Can of Coke and 2 donuts. It's not rocket science, is it? That would have given a massive high. Because what that donut is, it's not only lots of refined sugar. What is it also? It's the wheat. So the combination of the wheat and the sugar, that's what's tipped the scales on diabetes. That's what's caused the explosion. And how many are the combination of sugar and wheat cereal, sugar and wheat bread? You have to put sugar in to cause the bread to rise. There's always sugar in the pizza crust, because you need the sugar to get the yeast to rise. I don't think there's sugar in pasta or rice, but here. There we go, huge amounts in all of those cakes. Combination of both. Sugar doesn't get let off the hook, no way. But you couple that with the wheat, And that's where you get the tip in the scales. But let's have a look on glycemic index. Glycemic index is an index or a reading on how quickly the glucose in that food is released into the blood. So baseline is 55. So anything below is low GI, which is great for the diabetic. Anything that's above is considered high. Diabetics need to keep away or be very cautious of that. So berries sit at about 20, 26. So your berries are great foods for diabetics because they're low GI, a nice, slower, steady delivery of glucose. So that takes into consideration strawberries, raspberries, blackberries, blueberries, boysenberries, all your berries. Grapefruit, I think that's not a surprise that grapefruit sits at 25, not low, not far under 26 is grapefruit. Let's go up and look up here. Where does sugar sit? This is refined sugar, whether it's brown or white or tan, 59. That's not a surprise. What is a surprise is white wheat. So that's white bread, white cereal, sits at 69 because of the amylopectin A. Well, the more quantities you do, the higher it'll go. What about wholemeal, whole wheat, you call it, yeah? Whole wheat. 72. How could that be? Because it's not refined, it has more amylopectin A in it. And it's the amylopectin A that's getting the blood sugar level rise. That's why a lady said to me, I've been so frustrated. I do exactly what they tell me. Whole wheat bread, whole wheat pasta, whole wheat, whole wheat, whole wheat, whole wheat. And every 6 months, she said, I go to the doctor and he puts me on more insulin. And what's the definition of insanity? To do what you've always done and expect different results. She said, I know it's not working, but I don't know what else to do. I thought I was doing right. She said, the lady down the road, she has croissants, she has cheesecake, she has soda pop. No wonder she's a diabetic. But she said, I don't do that. So you know what I say? Well, it's not the soda and it's not the cheesecakes. We've got to go a little bit further. What is doing that? Because remember, Newton's third law of motion, to every action there's an equal and an opposite reaction. There is always a cause. That's the basic law of science. So if ever you're told it's just you, sorry, that's not scientific. And you can't blame genes. If we are subject to our genes, if we have no choice, that's not fair. And God's government is a government of fairness. In fact, it takes away our free choice, and that's not what God's government is based on. It's based on free choice. Well, the current research is showing you can only go 5% to genetics. The fact is, genetics may load the gun, but it is lifestyle that pulls the trigger. So even if both your parents had diabetes, you need never go there. It's an area of interesting study called epigenetics, the effect of my lifestyle, and as Chris mentioned, even my thoughts on my body. I can turn my genes on or off by the way I eat, by the way I live, even by the way I think. So sorry, you can't blame the genes. What we can look at is what we can change. And there's much that we can change. So considering this, it starts to give an illustration as to why. One more thing, and we'll look at this a little bit more tomorrow when we look at heart, and that is that there is a dangerous fat that's contributing to this. In his book, Fats That Heal, Fats That Kill, Udo Erasmus does a very good job at defining very carefully how there are killer fats, but there are also healing fats. And unfortunately, the last 30 years, 40 years, all fats have been put into one basket. Fats are bad. It was very interesting when I was in Florida, because I met a lady who was in her 80s. She will not touch fat. So it was probably when she was in her 30s, the brainwashing was big on fats. She won't even touch it. And her daughter, who's in her, I think, early 70s, she told me, we stay with her, she has not bought a bottle of olive oil since she doesn't know when. Well, we bought our own oil. And she started to consider using a little bit. She said, because we went through half a bottle, so how big would our bottle be? 16 ounce. We went through half that in a week. And she said to me, well, you can eat that oil because look at the size of you. I said, it's because I'm this size. What I do eat is a very low carbohydrate diet. And she said, look at the size of me, I can't eat it. I said, yeah, but look what you usually eat. and I've seen many people on a plant-based diet. This is what they're living on. And we touched on this morning the 3 essentials. What are the 3 essentials? And we'll look at this tonight when we look at the gut. Fibre. Most people that are on that, it's all refined. But even you can have an unrefined high carbohydrate diet and even get these high blood glucose levels. Protein. The protein that I eat is in nuts, seeds and beans and fats. But what I find is the generation who are now in their 40s, they don't seem to have the fat phobia that the next 2 generations have. And I was reading in one paper, the author said it's going to take a whole generation to get fat phobia out of the brain. Because as I've shown you, fat doesn't make you fat. And as I'll show you tomorrow, fat doesn't cause heart disease. There is one small area that does, and that is the refined oils, the refined seed oils. So you look at traditionally what people ate. Depends where you lived on the planet. If it was way up with the Eskimos, it was probably fish and seal, fat, whale, blah, blah. They were maybe the fats. Then you come down the planet a bit to the Mediterranean, it was olive oil. But actually, we've got a little bit of a gap in there. Let's go into the northern countries like Sweden, Finland. So what's traditionally been their fat is dairy. But you know, years and years ago, in the early 1900s, it was raw and it didn't have chemicals in it, so it was a lot safer back then. And it was saturated fat. But that saturated fat wasn't causing heart disease. And then we come down the planet to olive oil in the Mediterranean. Do you know they didn't have heart disease? Heart disease has only come around since the refining of the oils. And then we come to the equator. What have we got there? Palm oil, coconut oil. Do you know, before the Industrial Revolution, they didn't have heart disease either. And yet, what have we been told? Saturated fat causes heart disease. These island people have been living on coconut oil and palm oil for centuries. No heart attack. So something happened in that Industrial Revolution. In the Industrial Revolution, they started to create fabrics out of chemicals. That's your nylon, acrylic, polyester. They developed high heat chemical equipment to extract oil out of hard seeds. So when you go into the supermarket and you see the clear plastic bottles, it's the cheapest oil, cheapest. And another really dangerous one is Crisco. You know, Crisco, we don't really know that one. So you've got, be careful of vegetable oil. And how many think I want to protect myself from diabetes and heart disease? I'm going to go to the vegetables oils. Well, they're the worst. Margarine, it's one of the worst. In fact, and I'll look at this tomorrow, I'm jumping the gun a bit. They said, stop eating the butter, it'll give you heart disease, eat margarine. Did that lower heart disease? Not at all. Not at all. But cancer rates rose because we now have an oil that is damaging to the tissues. So those nasty, cheap seed oils, please don't touch them. They're in clear plastic bottles, which isn't a good sign, but they may as well be because they're already totally destroyed. So that's your canola oil. Don't touch it. That's poison. Canola oil, soy oil, peanut oil, safflower oil, all of those oils, don't touch them. What they do is they can actually interfere with the uppick of the insulin and the glucose getting into the cell. So the best oils are olive oil. It stood the test of time. And coconut oil, it stood the test of time. Got that? It stood the test of time. I'm cautious about this study and that study and that study because I have a friend who worked in research and he said, we were contracted to research a certain subject, and the people that contracted us to do that, they'd come in, have a look at the results, close the study, stop the funding. It wasn't what they wanted to hear. And he told me he's also seen them change the figures. But you know, our best studies are history. And when Captain Cook landed on the South Pacific Islands, he was confronted with the most magnificent specimens of humanity he'd ever seen. The men were tall, strong, agile. The women were beautiful, with luxurious hair. And what did they eat every meal? Coconut. We've got history that shows us the oils. And those oils, the olive oil and the coconut oil, are the two oils that are extracted from the flesh of the plant. So women could extract it in their kitchens. So when you buy olive oil, it should be first cold-pressed, extra virgin olive oil. Whereas the saturated fat, it's the easiest fat to digest, as you'll see when we go in the gut tonight, and the body prefers to burn it instead of store it. There's been so many misconceptions about fats. So when you hear people say it's fat that causes diabetes, have you heard that theory? You haven't, that's good, because it's not totally accurate. But there's one oil that can contribute to it, and that is those cheap seed oils. So how can we turn this around? I'm going to show you how the Sustain Me principles will enable you to conquer diabetes. Sunshine. Why has sunshine got something to do with diabetes? And we'll be able to get a nice bit today, but if you're not used to the sunshine, please don't go out there for too long. You will get burnt. The ultraviolet rays from the sun hit the skin, convert a form of cholesterol. Did you get that one? Tomorrow you'll find out that cholesterol is not your enemy. You don't have enough cholesterol levels, you're not going to make vitamin D. And vitamin D is important for the healing of diabetes. There are 2,500 receptor sites for vitamin D on the DNA, and that DNA is inside every single pancreatic cell. So we need it for the vitamin D. Sunshine is the number one. Use of water. We need to be well hydrated so that our pancreas can make glucagon and insulin. Water is necessary for the production of those vital hormones that are balancing blood glucose levels. We also need water to keep the blood nice and thin so that it's running through our veins, carrying our glucose and carrying our insulin and glucagon. And we need water to be able to access our glucagon, which is what we access between meals. See, we don't need to eat right this minute, because you'll notice tonight that digestion takes 3.5 to 4 hours. And you've got to let it be, let it do its job. Don't interfere with it. And many people who have a blood sugar level drop mid-morning, it's because they're dehydrated. And the body often doesn't know the difference between hunger and thirst. So if you're feeling hungry mid-morning, brain will say, well, this is silly. I had a good breakfast. Must be something else. I must need water. I remember my son Peter when he was 15, because I always say to the kids between meals, I'm hungry, have a glass of water, have a glass of water. He came to me about 1:30 one day and he said, Mum, the water's not doing it anymore. And I looked at my clock and I said, great, it's lunchtime. So if the water's not doing it anymore, it's usually time to eat. But to get that water inside the cell, which of course is the CBD where we need the water, we need to be having a little crystal of whole salt. And the salt that we predominantly use is Celtic salt, because it's a hand-harvested sea salt. It's harvested in the old Celtic method, and the way it's harvested, it locks up all the minerals inside. Seawater is 92 minerals, Celtic salt is 82. We'll look at salt in a bit more detail yet tomorrow when we look at heart. We need to be having at least 8 glasses of water a day. 8 lots of 8-ounce glasses of water. That will maintain body fluids. It'll maintain body fluids in the blood, it'll maintain body fluids in the lymphatic system, all through the body. Start early. That's how I do it. Start early. Did you try it? Did you take it to bed with you? Have a little bit? Try and have about half a glass at a time. Spread it out over the day. Use of water implies there's a time to drink it and a time not to drink it. The best time to drink it is between meals, because as you'll find out this evening, our stomach acid should be acid, because we need that acid to break our food down. If someone says, I've got too much acid in my stomach, I said, oh, you must be digesting your food well, because that's what acid does, is it breaks down our protein. But if we're drinking with the meals, what does water do to acid? It dilutes it. When we wake up in the morning, we don't have hydrochloric acid in our stomach. There's no need for it then, because we're not eating. When you see, smell, start to eat food, that's when the acid is released. So try and stop drinking half an hour before the meal and resume about an hour and a half after the meal. If we need to drink with the meal, it's an indication we sat to the meal dehydrated. And water alone is the only thing that will properly hydrate your body. If you're thirsty with a meal, by all means have a mouthful. A mouthful's not going to greatly reduce or dilute your hydrochloric acid. But water's absolutely essential for the conquering of diabetes. Sleep. Why do we need sleep if we want to conquer diabetes? Let me give you God's perfect mathematical formula. 8 hours to work, 8 hours to play, 8 hours to sleep. If you are not sleeping for 8 hours and you're finding it difficult to sleep for 8 hours, I've got some good news. You can rewire your brain. I think we look at that on Friday. I'm going to show you how you can rewire your brain. You can train yourself back into better sleep. Rome wasn't built in a day. I think we're having plantains for lunch. Can you smell that? Maybe I'm higher than you and I'm getting the smell in. My stomach says, I'd like some of that now. Wait. More water. Why is sleep necessary for the conquering of diabetes? Especially the hours before midnight. So ideally try and be asleep by 10 o'clock and get at least 2 hours before midnight, because that's when our melatonin levels are highest. And our melatonin is the fix and rejuvenate nighttime hormone. And so going to bed early allows the pancreas to revive and to restore. I love that story from Chris. Remember the guy that came, the architect who couldn't sleep? And because they were implementing these principles, he started to sleep. And I think we have a whole meeting on sleep Thursday night, I think. So we can explore in detail. I'll show you what happens while we sleep. Trust in God. Now, in our first class this morning, I showed you that God's methods are based on faith. And what the research is showing now is that when we picture a part of our body healing, it stimulates healing in that area. Isn't that interesting? So picture your pancreas, picture it as happy, picture it as reviving, and it actually can stimulate even more healing to that pancreatic area. Thank God for who you are right now. Thank God for your age, your size, everything about you. Thank Him right now. Because remember my daughter Emma? I'm going to grow up in a minute. My pancreas is going to be better in a minute. We want to be better in a minute, but it does take this little 4-letter word down here. It takes time. We've got to give it time, but we're going to get there. And my daughter Emma grew all right. She even grew taller than me. That's faith. Abstain. There are some things that must stop if you want your pancreas to revive. So let's make a list of what must stop. All refined sugars. If someone has diabetes, even the honey and the maple syrup must stop until you've got a happy pancreas. There is one sugar that doesn't cause an insulin response, and that's stevia. One lady said, "Oh, I can't eat stevia, it's too bitter." And I said, "Well, you've used too much." Stevia is a very delicate sweetener, and you do not need much. In fact, on the stevia pack I've got at home, it says 1/16 of a teaspoon of stevia is equal to 2 teaspoons of sugar. So you see, it's hard to believe that, so most people put too much in. So if you're going to sweeten something, just put a very small amount in, because if it's not sweet enough, you can put another small amount in. But if you put too much in, you get a bitter aftertaste. But because I'm familiar with stevia, I don't use very much if I'm using it. Monk fruit, I'm not familiar with monk fruit. I guess that's another one. You can investigate that one. Also, what must stop, and I think that I've explained it enough, wheat must stop. If you're looking for conquering diabetes, do I eat wheat? I do, but not much. But I'm sure if I ate it 3 times a day, I'd start to have some health problems. But I don't think I've eaten wheat for about 2 months at the moment. But I don't have diabetes. If I had diabetes, I wouldn't touch it because I want to conquer my diabetes. But what I find when it's conquered, some people find they can have a little now and then. But when you're in the process of reviving your pancreas, you can't touch it. Coffee. Yes, I usually get a bit of a groan there. I can't remember where it was a few weeks ago. I think it was when I was in Idaho. Every time I mention it, there's this groan. Now, if you're a coffee drinker, don't stop. Otherwise, you won't come to class tomorrow. You'll be suffering so badly. People say, "Do you drink coffee?" I say, "No, I just watch the people suffer." Day 1 at our health retreat. This is the telltale sign. If someone's coming to the health retreat, they say, "How can I prepare?" I say, start easing off the coffee. If you're on 3 cups of coffee a day, go to 3 half cups a day, then 3/3 cups a day, then 3/4 cups a day, and you can ease off it. Or what one lady did, instead of putting 1 teaspoon of coffee in, she put half a teaspoon of coffee and half a teaspoon of, I think, Cafex, or there are some cereal beverages that have like a coffee-type flavour, but they're roasted roots. And she said there was no difference in the taste in the cup of coffee was having. And every day it was, I think, Roma. I'm not familiar with the Roma. She said after a week, it was 3/4 of a teaspoon of Roma and a quarter of a teaspoon of coffee. And she ended up getting off her coffee without any pain or suffering. So just ease off it. Because when you realise what it does, you're going to want to get off it. For ladies, it really ages ladies quickly. The wrinkles come quickly. It contributes to osteoporosis. I'm so glad I've got a whole meeting on osteoporosis later in the week. What it does is it leaches minerals out of your body, especially the calciums and the magnesiums. And it disrupts the neurotransmitters. I mean, that's why people have it. Gives them a little lift, makes them feel good. It's like, let's say a tiger, or maybe that's not appropriate, a bear. Let's say a bear just walks in through that door. We'd all be, ah! We'd all start running, is that right? Yeah. I don't know, hide ourselves in the toilet or something. I said to someone, climb a tree. They say, no, they climb trees. But there'd be a crisis response. And that crisis response was put there by God so that when you're in a crisis, you can run faster than you've ever run before. But that's what coffee does. It causes that crisis response. And so the person goes, oh, this is nice. Just makes me feel good, gets me up and going for the day, but it's a crisis response. It's like paying out, it's like getting a loan to pay off your loan. Eventually, there's a deficit, and where you really feel it for long-term coffee drinkers is the adrenal glands. You've heard of adrenal exhaustion. You can't just catch disease. You can't just catch adrenal exhaustion. There's a reason, and often it's several years of coffee drinking. How many people in their 50s, even 40s, oh, I'm always tired. Well, why? There's a reason. Did you see our presenter, Walt Cross, last night? Did you see the energy he has? And he's not a young man. Do you know, we should have energy right up till the day we die. And one of the reasons people are losing their energies is because of caffeine. With coffee, also with tea. Now, the reason why I say that must stop when you're wanting to conquer diabetes is it's a crisis response. Whenever there's a crisis response, more insulin's released to get more glucose into the blood so you can do the run of your life. So it's a contributing factor to diabetes. Alcohol, that's probably not a surprise. It's very, very high sugar. So they are probably the main contributing factors. Oh, and the cheap seed oils. The cheap seed oils, they must absolutely stop. Get the chemicals out of your homes, out of your clothes, out of your personal care products. We'll be looking at that in a little bit more detail in other lectures. Inhale through the nose, because when you inhale through the nose, you will get more oxygen. And more oxygen means more energy. See, this energy cycle is in every cell that is in the pancreas. Nutrition. We've looked at nutrition, the importance of high fibre, generous proteins, and great fats. If you're not really keen on the breakfast we had this morning, you don't have to eat that breakfast. You've got to choose something you love, something that you really like. And for people that much prefer a sweet breakfast, you could have the millet. They had the millet this morning. And on the millet, you could put coconut cream. You could put lots of chopped up berries, maybe a very light sprinkle of stevia, and then put ground flaxseed all over it. So there, That's a breakfast, or even applesauce, unsweetened applesauce, because apples are low on the glycemic index, and a handful of nuts. So that is more attractive for some people. So it's got to be food that you like. Moderation. Moderation is an interesting one, because what have diabetics been told for the last 30, 40 years? How often do you have to eat? Every 2 hours, is that right? Well, they've suddenly changed their mind. Now notice that they don't say, sorry, we were wrong. They say, new research reveals. Well, this is not new research. What's the old saying? We should eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen, and supper like a pauper. It's been around for hundreds of years. Well, they've given it another name now. It's called time-restricted eating. It came out of the 5-2 diet, the intermittent fasting, and it's eating twice, 6 hours apart. So that's 6 hours apart, just twice in a 24-hour period. So what does that equal? That's an 18-hour fast. And you know what they're finding? They're finding blood glucose levels are stabilising. Because as you'll discover tonight, even when our stomach's empty, our nutrients are being absorbed out of our small intestine. That's why even when your stomach's empty, you don't have to have food. And even when you wake up the morning, you don't have to have food. Because you've got stores there. You can do your exercise, and if that runs out, then we've got fat stores and we've got some glycogen in the liver. We've got great stores there. As you'll find out tonight, digestion takes 3.5 to 4 hours. And then the stomach loves a rest of about an hour. But you will be able to maintain blood glucose levels as long as you're drinking the water, and that little bit of salt will help to maintain it. So some people choose to have breakfast at 9 and have a meal at 3, or 8 and 2. But if you have breakfast at 7 and have lunch at 12 or 12:30, you might need a little something at night. You've got to work out what works for you. As long as you keep to breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen, and sometimes the queen eats as much as the king, and supper light. What would light be for a diabetic? A bowl of soup? Soup's great. Maybe a smoothie? Gluten-free crackers with an avocado? That'd be light. You've got to do what works for you. But exercise is particularly important for the diabetic, because it is exercise that helps to unlock those glycogen stores. We had a young man named Dan who attended our program, and he was 19 and he was type 1 diabetic. And his doctor told him that his pancreas was dead. I said, what's dead? Is it gangrene? What's dead? I said, if there's blood going through that pancreas, it's alive. Because Leviticus 17:11 says the life of the flesh is in the blood. He said, that's just what I've been told. So I'm intrigued as to why this 19-year-old had type 1 diabetes, and I discovered that at the age of 15, he was given very strong antibiotics for a chest cold, and it killed the beta cells in his pancreas. So it was after that he started to put on weight, drinking heaps of water, because insulin has a one-set mind: I must store, I must store, I must store. That's what insulin does. Its role is to get the glucose out of the blood and into the storage. He was on 90 units of insulin a day. So he was with us for 4 weeks. The first week, he'd get a blood sugar level low in the middle of the night. Why? Because he was on too much insulin. What that insulin allowed him to do is eat that. That's what it allowed him to do. And we didn't give him that. So he was going too low. So he'd have a candy, and that'd get the blood sugar level up very high, very fast, and give him a headache. But that's what he'd been taught to do. Second week, he felt a bit guilty about having a candy at the health retreat, so he had an apple. He had an apple in the middle of the night. It takes a while to eat an apple in the middle of the night, but the sweet juice from the apple got his blood sugar level up, but he didn't get a headache because of the minerals, and the fibre in the apple gives a slower release. Third week, he tried something else. Well, the third time, which was probably into the second week, if he had a blood sugar level low in the middle of the night, he'd get up and he'd do 30 push-ups. Get his blood sugar level up. Where'd that come from? His glycogen stores and, if necessary, his fat stores. In fact, you know what he came to me? He's a very quiet young man because we didn't even know what he was doing in the middle of the night. But you know, I am the one. I am my own doctor. That's why we step back a bit. They do their own blood sugar levels. They work it out themselves. We're just the teachers. We're just teaching people what to do. He came to me and he said, "Why didn't anyone tell me about glycogen stores?" So for 4 years, he's been battling this and no one told him about glycogen stores. I think it's the diabetic's best kept secret. Now, I know your levels are a bit different to Australian, so I'm just going to give you Australian levels. So average blood sugar level, probably mine, I've actually never taken my blood sugar, but mine would probably sit about 5 or 6. That's about average. He got up one morning, took his blood sugar, and it was 3. That's nearly passing out. So he had a bit of salt, water, got dressed, had another bit of salt, another water, and then went for a run. Up the hills, down the hills, up the hills. Came back, took his blood sugar levels. They were 9, and he'd eaten nothing. Where'd that come from? His glycogen stores and his fat stores. And he was very happy because by the end of 4 weeks, he was losing his tummy. He was losing a little bit of excess fat. After 3 weeks, he wasn't on 90 units of insulin a day. He was on 10 units of insulin a day. He went from 90 units a day to 10 units a day just by implementing this. In the little book, The Ministry of Healing, in the chapter, The Physician, the Educator, did you know what that's what physician means? Educator. But unfortunately, because of Medicare in Australia, they're only allowed to spend 15 minutes with you. How long can they find out in 15 minutes? That's why you're the doctor. Part of being your own doctor is documenting your case. Document your case. Look at the threads that have come together to how you are today. But remember, today's the first day of the rest of your life. Today, you can make a change. Today, you can make a difference. So this young man left our retreat excited. No wonder he was excited, because if you're on 90 units of insulin a day when you're 19, what does the future look like? Not great. Not great at all. And whenever he got blood sugar level lows, that's when he'd get cranky, he'd get snappy, he'd get depressed, because remember, the brain can only hold a 2-minute supply of glucose. But the food that he was being given gave him a steady, consistent delivery of fuel. He started to hydrate his body. He found that the exercise did so much. If he was too high or too low, the exercise balanced it out. It balanced it out. Tomorrow, when we look at the heart, I'm going to look at the exercise in detail. But remember what I said, running up hills, walking down hills? What that high intensity did, it reversed, and it can reverse very quickly, insulin resistance. It can be reversed in a week, insulin resistance. How do you reverse it? Get the carbohydrates right down, high fibre, generous proteins, great fats, exercise, and because he was doing the high intensity, his cells developed extra receptor sites for insulin. How exciting is that? It's all there. Everything we need, we've got. It's just knowing how to access it. And Proverbs 14 verse 6 says, knowledge is easy to him that understands. My aim is to give you an understanding of how these things work, how this incredible body works, so that you can once again gain control of your health, of your life. And I think it's our responsibility to astonish our doctors. And I've seen so many people, the doctors just scratch their head. They've been told they wouldn't live. They've been told they'd be on this for the rest of their life. And they've actually conquered it. And I mentioned last night, it's times like these, I want to have a little bag with medals in it, medals to give to people who've successfully conquered by themselves their health conditions. We're going to have a break now, and I think that we have a long break now. It's 12:05. I've gone a little bit over. I think we have book signing and photos now, and we just have to find Ricky. He's around somewhere. And lunch, I think, is at 1 o'clock. So thank you for your attention. Thank you. Thank you.